The wind was howling at 43 miles per hour across the Afghan mountainside. Dust devils danced between the rocky outcrops, and the temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the last hour. For most people, these would be impossible conditions for any kind of precision work. But Marine Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Martinez wasn't most people. She had been lying in the same position for 6 hours, watching through her scope as enemy fighters moved through the valley below. Her spotter, Corporal Jenkins, had been whispering wind calculations and distance measurements into her ear for the past 20 minutes. But something was different this time, something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her own limits. When the Navy SEAL team leader crawled up beside her position and placed his custom rifle in her hands, Sarah felt the weight of more than just the weapon. She felt the weight of 8 lives hanging in the balance, the weight of a mission that had gone completely wrong, and the weight of a shot that everyone said was impossible. The target was moving. The distance was beyond anything she had ever attempted. The conditions were deteriorating by the minute, and yet, as Sarah settled behind that unfamiliar rifle and began to control her breathing, she felt something she had never experienced before, a strange calm that seemed to slow down time itself. This is the story of how a small-town girl from Texas, who had never planned to join the military, found herself holding the fate of an entire special operations team in her steady hands. It's a story about precision under pressure, about pushing beyond what seems possible, and about the moment when skill, instinct, and sheer determination converge to create something extraordinary. What happened next would not only save lives, but would also change the way the military thought about long-range precision shooting forever. This is that story. Sarah Martinez had never held a real gun until she was 18 years old. Growing up in the small town of Cedar Creek, Texas, she was more interested in books than bullets, more fascinated by mathematics than marksmanship. Her father worked at the local hardware store, and her mother taught elementary school. They were simple, hard-working people who believed in education and honest living. The idea of joining the military had never crossed Sarah's mind until her senior year of high school, when her family faced a financial crisis. Her father had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition that required expensive surgery and months of rehabilitation. The medical bills were mounting, and the family's insurance covered only a portion of the costs. College seemed like an impossible dream, and Sarah watched as her parents worked double shifts just to keep their heads above water. It was during this difficult time that Marine recruiter Staff Sergeant Rodriguez visited her high school career fair. He wasn't the typical military recruiter with his polished shoes and perfect uniform. Instead, he spoke about service, about making a difference, and about the educational opportunities available to those who served their country. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the promise of college tuition or steady pay. It was something else entirely. Rodriguez mentioned the precision required in military operations, the mathematical calculations involved in everything from logistics to ballistics. He spoke about how the military needed people who could think clearly under pressure, who could solve complex problems when lives were on the line. For Sarah, who had always excelled at mathematics and physics, this was the first time someone had suggested that her academic skills could be valuable in a practical, real-world setting. After the presentation, Sarah approached Rodriguez with questions. She wasn't interested in the typical military occupational specialties that most recruits inquired about. Instead, she asked about the technical aspects of military operations, about the science behind weaponry and tactics. Rodriguez was impressed by her curiosity and her analytical mind. He suggested she consider becoming a markswoman, explaining that precision shooting required not just physical skill, but also a deep understanding of physics, meteorology, and mathematics. The conversation with Rodriguez planted a seed in Sarah's mind, but it was a chance encounter at the local shooting range that truly changed her life's direction. Her uncle Mike, a Vietnam veteran who rarely talked about his service, had taken her to the range to teach her basic firearm safety. Mike believed that everyone should know how to handle a weapon safely, regardless of whether they chose to own one. Sarah's first time holding a rifle was awkward and intimidating. The weapon felt heavy and foreign in her hands. Mike patiently explained the fundamentals of marksmanship: breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and follow-through. He emphasized that shooting was more mental than physical, that success depended on consistency, concentration, and the ability to control one's mind and body under pressure. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Sarah demonstrated a natural aptitude for precision shooting. Her first shots were scattered across the target, But as Mike coached her through the basics, her groupings began to tighten. By the end of the afternoon, she was consistently hitting the center of the target at distances that impressed even Mike, who had seen his share of talented shooters during his military service. What set Sarah apart wasn't just her natural steadiness or her good eyesight. It was her analytical approach to the challenge. While other beginners focused on trying harder or gripping the rifle tighter, Sarah began to understand shooting as a series of variables that could be controlled and optimized. She asked Mike about wind effects, bullet trajectory, and the physics of projectile motion. She wanted to understand not just how to shoot, but why the techniques worked. Over the following months, Sarah spent every weekend at the shooting range with Mike. She read books on ballistics and marksmanship theory. She studied meteorology to understand how weather affected bullet flight. She even began to keep detailed logs of her practice sessions, recording environmental conditions, ammunition types, and her performance under different circumstances. Mike watched his niece's progress with a mixture of pride and concern. He recognized that Sarah possessed a rare combination of natural talent and intellectual curiosity that could make her an exceptional marksman. But he also knew the weight of such skills, the responsibility that came with the ability to affect outcomes at great distances. As Sarah's skills improved, she began to compete in local shooting competitions. Her methodical approach and consistent performance caught the attention of other competitors and coaches. She wasn't the most physically imposing competitor, nor did she have access to the most expensive equipment, but her scores were consistently among the highest in every event she entered. The decision to enlist in the Marines came gradually, influenced by a combination of practical necessity and growing passion for precision shooting. Her family's financial situation hadn't improved, and college remained financially out of reach. But more than that, Sarah had discovered something she was genuinely gifted at, something that challenged both her mind and her body in ways she had never experienced. When she finally signed her enlistment papers, Sarah specified her interest in becoming a designated marksman. Rodriguez, who had stayed in touch with her throughout her senior year, was delighted by her decision. He had seen many recruits over the years, but few demonstrated the combination of natural ability, dedication, and intellectual curiosity that Sarah possessed. Boot camp at Paris Island was a shock to Sarah's system. The physical demands were unlike anything she had experienced, and the psychological pressure of military training pushed her to her limits. But when it came to weapons training, Sarah excelled beyond all expectations. Her drill instructors noted her exceptional marksmanship scores and her ability to remain calm and focused under pressure. During her initial marksmanship training, Sarah's scores were consistently perfect or near perfect. She demonstrated an intuitive understanding of wind reading and range estimation that impressed even veteran instructors. But it wasn't just her accuracy that set her apart. It was her ability to teach and explain the technical aspects of shooting to her fellow recruits. After completing boot camp and infantry training, Sarah was selected for the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, one of the most challenging and selective training programs in the military. The school had a notoriously high attrition rate, with many physically and mentally tough Marines failing to complete the rigorous course. The Scout Sniper School tested every aspect of Sarah's character and abilities. The physical demands were extreme, with students required to carry heavy equipment over long distances while maintaining the mental focus necessary for precision shooting. The stalking exercises, where students had to move undetected across open terrain while carrying full equipment, pushed her to physical and mental limits she didn't know she possessed. But it was during the long-range shooting phases of training that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The course required students to engage targets at distances up to 1,000 yards, under various environmental conditions. Sarah not only consistently hit her targets but did so with a level of precision that amazed her instructors. What impressed the instructors most was Sarah's scientific approach to long-range shooting. While other students relied primarily on their experience and instincts, Sarah treated each shot as a physics problem to be solved. She would spend time calculating wind effects, barometric pressure influences, and bullet drop, with a level of mathematical precision that was unusual even among experienced snipers. Her final exercise at Scout Sniper School involved a simulated combat scenario where she had to engage multiple targets at varying distances while under time pressure and simulated enemy fire. Sarah's performance was flawless, with every shot finding its mark despite the challenging conditions. Upon graduation, Sarah was assigned to a Marine infantry unit deployed to Afghanistan. Her reputation as an exceptional marksman had preceded her, and she quickly became an integral part of her unit's operations. Her first deployment was a learning experience that went far beyond anything she had encountered in training. The reality of combat shooting was different from anything Sarah had experienced on training ranges. The targets moved. The stakes were life and death. The environmental conditions were often extreme, and the psychological pressure was intense. But Sarah adapted quickly, drawing on her analytical nature and extensive training to perform effectively in combat situations. During her first tour, Sarah's accuracy and consistency earned her the respect of her fellow Marines and the attention of higher command. She participated in numerous successful operations, providing overwatch and precision fire support that saved lives and completed missions. Her ability to engage targets at extreme ranges became legendary within her unit. It was during this deployment that Sarah first encountered Navy SEALs during joint operations. She was impressed by their professionalism, their equipment, and their advanced techniques. The SEALs, in turn, were impressed by the young Marine's shooting abilities and her technical knowledge of long-range ballistics. After completing her first deployment, Sarah returned to the United States for advanced training and rest. During this time, she continued to refine her skills, studying advanced ballistics theory and experimenting with new techniques and equipment. She also began to develop her own training methods, combining traditional marksmanship instruction with scientific analysis and mathematical modeling. Her reputation continued to grow within the sniper community, and she was eventually selected for assignment to a Special Operations Support Unit. This assignment would put her in contact with some of the most elite units in the military and provide opportunities to participate in the most challenging and important missions. Sarah's journey from a small-town girl with no military background to one of the Marine Corps' most skilled marksmen had taken just 3 years, but the real test of her abilities was yet to come. The skills she had developed, the knowledge she had gained, and the confidence she had built would all be put to the ultimate test in the mountains of Afghanistan, when a Navy SEAL team would depend on her abilities to survive an impossible situation. As she prepared for her second deployment, Sarah had no way of knowing that she was about to face the most challenging shot of her career, a shot that would test not only her technical skills but also her courage, her judgment, and her ability to perform under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The small-town girl who had once been intimidated by holding a rifle was about to prove that with dedication, training, and the right mindset, the impossible could become possible. The morning of March 15th began like any other day at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan's Khost Province. Sarah Martinez was reviewing weather reports and checking her equipment when the call came through the command center. A high-priority mission was developing, and they needed her expertise immediately. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hawk Peterson, the SEAL team leader, briefed Sarah on the situation, with the kind of calm professionalism that only came from years of dangerous operations. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The target would be meeting with his lieutenants in a remote compound in the mountains, and this represented a rare opportunity to eliminate a significant threat. The mission plan was straightforward, but challenging. Peterson's 8-man SEAL team would infiltrate the compound under cover of darkness, capture or eliminate the target, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch from a ridge approximately 800 meters from the target location, covering the team's approach and extraction routes. What made this mission particularly complex was the terrain. The compound sat in a narrow valley surrounded by steep, rocky hills that provided excellent defensive positions but limited escape routes. The area was known to be heavily patrolled by enemy forces, and recent intelligence suggested that the Taliban had been reinforcing their presence in the region. As the team prepared for insertion, Sarah studied the topographical maps and satellite imagery with her characteristic attention to detail. She identified multiple potential firing positions on the ridge overlooking the compound and calculated firing solutions for various scenarios. The environmental conditions looked challenging, with strong winds predicted and the possibility of a weather front moving through the area during the operation. Peterson assigned Corporal Mike Jenkins as Sarah's spotter for the mission. Jenkins was an experienced operator with multiple deployments, and Sarah had worked with him before. Their partnership was based on mutual respect and a shared understanding of the precision required for long-range shooting. Jenkins was skilled at reading environmental conditions, and could provide the constant stream of information Sarah needed to make accurate shots at extended ranges. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with the team landing at their planned insertion point just after midnight. The SEAL team moved toward their objective, while Sarah and Jenkins made their way to the overwatch position on the ridge. The climb was steep and treacherous in the darkness, but both Marines were accustomed to difficult terrain and reached their position with time to spare. From their perch on the ridge, Sarah had an excellent view of the entire valley. She could see the compound clearly through her night vision scope, and the various approach routes were visible. She established range cards from multiple potential targets and began monitoring the environmental conditions. The wind was stronger than predicted, gusting up to 30 miles per hour, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Jenkins set up his spotting scope and began calling out wind readings and other environmental data. The two settled into the patient routine of overwatch, maintaining constant vigilance while the SEAL team moved into position. Sarah's rifle was a custom-built system that she had been using for over a year, and she knew its capabilities intimately. The first sign that something was wrong came just before 0200 hours. Jenkins spotted movement on the ridgelines surrounding the valley, more movement than their intelligence had predicted. Enemy fighters were positioning themselves in the hills, and it appeared they were expecting trouble. The Taliban commander might have been warned, or this could have been a routine security precaution, but either way, it complicated the mission significantly. Peterson's voice came through their radio with controlled tension. His team had reached the compound and confirmed that the target was present, but they had also identified significantly more enemy personnel than expected. The compound wasn't just a meeting location. It appeared to be a fortified position with multiple defensive positions and a substantial garrison. Despite the increased risk, Peterson made the decision to proceed with the mission. The target was too valuable to pass up, and his team had trained for exactly these kinds of challenging situations. Sarah watched through her scope as the SEALs began their approach to the compound, moving with the fluid precision that came from years of training and experience. The assault began at 0230 hours with breaching charges that lit up the night. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from inside the compound as the SEAL team engaged the enemy. Through her scope, she watched Peterson's men move through the buildings with practiced efficiency, clearing rooms and neutralizing threats. For the first 30 minutes, everything went according to plan. The SEALs had achieved surprise and were systematically clearing the compound. Sarah provided overwatch, ready to engage any threats that appeared, but the team seemed to have the situation well in hand. Then everything changed in an instant. Enemy reinforcements began arriving from multiple directions, more than anyone had anticipated. The Taliban had apparently prepared for exactly this kind of assault, and they had positioned response teams throughout the area. Sarah watched in growing alarm as enemy fighters moved into positions that would cut off the SEAL team's planned extraction route. Peterson's voice over the radio was calm but urgent. His team had successfully eliminated the target, but they were now facing overwhelming numbers and were in danger of being surrounded. They needed immediate support, and the planned extraction helicopter was still 20 minutes away. Sarah began engaging enemy positions that threatened the SEAL team's movement, her shots echoing across the valley as she systematically eliminated threats. Jenkins called out targets and provided wind readings as Sarah worked to provide effective fire support. Her shooting was precise and deadly, but there were simply too many enemy fighters for one sniper to handle. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more enemy forces arrived. The SEALs fought their way out of the compound, but found themselves pinned down in a defensive position with limited cover. They were taking fire from multiple directions, and their ammunition was running low. It was at this critical moment that Peterson made a decision that would change everything. Leaving his team in their defensive position, he low-crawled through enemy fire to reach Sarah's position on the ridge. When he arrived, he was carrying his personal rifle, a custom long-range system that was significantly more advanced than Sarah's Marine-issue weapon. Peterson's rifle was chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum and equipped with the most advanced optics and ballistic computers available. It was capable of accurate shots at ranges that exceeded anything Sarah had attempted in combat. But more importantly, it was zeroed to Peterson's specifications and had characteristics that Sarah had never experienced. "I need you to take this," Peterson said, placing the rifle in Sarah's hands. "My team is pinned down at coordinates 334521. Enemy commander is directing the attack from a position at 335,525. Range is 1847 meters. Wind is variable, gusting up to 43 miles per hour. This shot is beyond what anyone should attempt, but you're the best shooter I've ever seen, and my men are going to die if someone doesn't take out that commander. Sarah looked through the unfamiliar scope and immediately understood the magnitude of what Peterson was asking. The target was barely visible even with the advanced optics. The range was at the absolute limit of what was possible with any rifle system. The environmental conditions were deteriorating by the minute, with wind gusts that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible. But as she studied the target area, Sarah began to see the problem as she always did, as a series of variables that could be calculated and controlled. She began running ballistic calculations in her head, while Jenkins provided wind readings and range confirmations. The shot was theoretically possible, but it would require perfect execution under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The enemy commander was directing his forces from a position behind a large boulder that provided him with cover from most angles. He was only exposed for brief moments as he moved to observe different parts of the battlefield. Sarah would have only seconds to identify him, aim, and fire. There would be no time for a second shot. As Sarah settled behind Peterson's rifle, she felt the weight of 8 lives resting in her hands. The SEAL team was running out of time and ammunition. The extraction helicopter was still 15 minutes away. If the enemy commander continued to coordinate the attack, Peterson's men would be overrun before help could arrive. Sarah began her shooting routine, controlling her breathing and heart rate while calculating the complex ballistic solution required for the shot. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and she would have to time her shot to coincide with a temporary lull. Jenkins provided constant updates on conditions while keeping watch for any threats to their position. Through the scope, Sarah could see the enemy commander moving between positions, directing his fighters with hand signals and radio communications. She began to identify a pattern in his movement, a routine that might give her the opportunity she needed. But the window would be small, and the conditions were getting worse. The wind suddenly shifted, and Sarah felt a moment of calm descend over her. Years of training, thousands of hours of practice, and a natural gift for precision shooting all converged in this single moment. She had faced impossible shots before, but never under these conditions, never with so many lives hanging in the balance. As she prepared to take the most challenging shot of her career, Sarah thought briefly of her journey from a small town in Texas to this remote mountain in Afghanistan. All of her training, all of her dedication, all of her analytical study of the science of marksmanship had led to this moment. The enemy commander stepped into her crosshairs, and time seemed to slow down. Sarah's finger found the trigger, and she began the careful, controlled squeeze that would determine the fate of 8 American warriors and change her life forever. The impossible shot was about to become possible, if her skills, her training, and her courage were enough to overcome the overwhelming odds against success. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Sarah Martinez settled behind Lieutenant Commander Peterson's rifle. Through the advanced scope, she could see the enemy commander clearly despite the distance of 1847 meters. He was a tall man with a distinctive beard, wearing traditional Afghan clothing, but moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Every few seconds, he would emerge from behind his cover to survey the battlefield and direct his forces. Jenkins whispered wind readings in Sarah's ear, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding in the valley below. Wind is gusting northwest at 38 miles per hour, dropping to 22, then spiking back up. Temperature has dropped 4 degrees in the last 10 minutes. Humidity is rising. Storm front is definitely moving in. Sarah absorbed this information while running complex ballistic calculations in her mind. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge would travel for nearly 3 seconds before reaching its target at this distance. During that time, the wind could shift multiple times, the target could move, and atmospheric conditions could change. She was attempting a shot that most snipers would consider impossible even under perfect conditions. But Sarah had never approached shooting as most snipers did. For her, every shot was a physics problem with variables that could be measured, calculated, and compensated for. The challenge wasn't whether the shot was possible in theory. It was whether she could execute all the required calculations and adjustments in real time while under extreme pressure. Through her scope, she watched the enemy commander's movement pattern. He would emerge from cover, spend approximately 8 to 12 seconds observing and directing his forces, then duck back behind the boulder. During his exposed periods, he moved constantly, making targeting extremely difficult. Sarah needed to predict not only where he would be when the bullet arrived, but also when he would be in an exposed position. The SEAL team's situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Peterson's voice crackled through the radio, providing updates on their ammunition status and the enemy's movements. They had managed to establish a defensive perimeter in a small depression that provided some cover, but they were surrounded and taking fire from multiple directions. The extraction helicopter was still 12 minutes away and enemy reinforcements continued to arrive. Sarah could hear the stress in Peterson's voice despite his professional calm. These were his men, his responsibility, and he had entrusted their lives to a Marine sniper, attempting an impossible shot with an unfamiliar rifle. The weight of that trust was not lost on Sarah as she continued to study the target area and refine her calculations. The wind suddenly shifted again, this time dropping to almost nothing for a few seconds before gusting back up to 40 miles per hour. Sarah realized that these momentary lulls were her best opportunity, but they were unpredictable and brief. She would need to be ready to fire instantly when the conditions aligned. Jenkins continued to provide environmental readings while monitoring the overall tactical situation. "Commander is moving again," he whispered. "He's spending more time exposed now, probably trying to coordinate a final assault. You're going to get your chance, but it needs to be soon." Sarah adjusted her position slightly, ensuring that her rifle was perfectly stable and her body was optimally positioned for the shot. She had fired thousands of rounds with her own rifle system, but Peterson's weapon was different in subtle but important ways. The trigger had a different feel. The stock fit differently against her shoulder, and the scope's reticle was calibrated differently than what she was accustomed to. Despite these differences, Sarah found that the advanced rifle system actually provided some advantages for this extreme shot. The ballistic computer integrated with the scope provided real-time corrections for range, wind, and atmospheric conditions. The rifle's superior accuracy potential gave her a better chance of success at this extreme distance. As she prepared for the shot, Sarah thought about all the factors that had led to this moment. Her natural talent, her methodical training, her scientific approach to marksmanship, and thousands of hours of practice had all prepared her for this instant. But beyond the technical aspects, she drew strength from knowing that 8 American warriors depended on her skills and courage. The enemy commander emerged from cover again, and Sarah could see that he was becoming more animated in his directions to his fighters. Through her scope, she watched him point toward the SEAL team's position and make gestures that clearly indicated he was preparing for a final assault. This was likely her last opportunity before the situation became hopeless. Sarah began to control her breathing, slowing her heart rate, and entering the focused mental state that she had cultivated through years of training. She placed her finger on the trigger and began the careful pressure that would eventually break the shot. But she waited, watching the wind indicators and monitoring the target's movement pattern. Jenkins sensed that the moment was approaching and provided a steady stream of information. "Wind is dropping 25 miles per hour, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Target is moving to his observation position. He's exposed. Wind is down to 12 miles per hour." Sarah felt the moment of perfect alignment approaching. The wind had dropped to its lowest level in the past hour. The target was moving into his most exposed position, and all of her calculations indicated that the conditions were as optimal as they were likely to get. She began to increase pressure on the trigger while tracking the commander's movement. At the exact moment when all factors aligned, Sarah broke the shot. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge left the barrel with a thunderous crack that echoed across the mountainside. Sarah maintained her position behind the scope, tracking the bullet's path and watching for impact. The projectile traveled through the thin mountain air for 2.8 seconds, covering the distance of 1847 meters, while dropping nearly 40 feet due to gravity and drifting several feet due to wind effects. During this time, Sarah held her breath and maintained perfect stillness, knowing that the slightest movement could affect her ability to observe the shot's outcome. The bullet struck the enemy commander center mass just as he turned to point toward the SEAL team's position. The impact was clearly visible through Sarah's scope, and the commander immediately collapsed behind his cover. The effect on the enemy forces was instantaneous and dramatic. Without their leader's coordination, the Taliban fighters began to lose cohesion in their attack. The disciplined, coordinated assault that had threatened to overrun the SEAL team quickly devolved into confused, uncoordinated fire from individual positions. The enemy fighters continued to shoot, but they were no longer working together effectively. Peterson's voice came through the radio with barely contained excitement. "Outstanding shot! Target is down and the pressure is easing. The enemy has lost coordination. We can hold until extraction arrives." Sarah remained in position, ready to provide additional fire support if needed. She continued to scan the area for other high-value targets while Jenkins monitored the overall tactical situation. The shot had been successful beyond their best hopes, not only eliminating the enemy commander but also disrupting the entire attack. Over the next 10 minutes, the enemy fire gradually diminished as individual fighters began to withdraw from their positions. Without central coordination, many of the Taliban forces decided to disengage rather than continue an attack that was no longer coordinated or likely to succeed. The extraction helicopter arrived on schedule and successfully evacuated Peterson's team without further casualties. As the helicopter lifted off with the SEAL team aboard, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the mission had succeeded and that all American personnel were safe. Pride in having successfully completed the most challenging shot of her career. But also a sobering awareness of the life she had taken and the responsibility that came with her skills. The flight back to base was subdued, with each team member processing the events of the night in their own way. Peterson approached Sarah during the flight and simply said, "That was the finest piece of shooting I've ever witnessed. You saved 8 lives tonight with that shot." His words carried the weight of someone who understood both the technical difficulty of what Sarah had accomplished and the courage required to attempt such a shot under pressure. The after-action review of the mission would later reveal that Sarah's shot had been recorded by multiple surveillance systems, providing detailed documentation of what many experts would call one of the finest examples of long-range marksmanship in military history. The shot was made under extreme environmental conditions, at a distance that pushed the absolute limits of the weapon system's capabilities, against a moving target, and with the lives of 8 American warriors hanging in the balance. Word of Sarah's achievement spread quickly through the special operations community. The combination of technical precision, tactical impact, and courage under pressure made the shot legendary among military marksmen. But for Sarah, the recognition was secondary to the knowledge that her skills had made a difference when it mattered most. In the weeks following the mission, Sarah received numerous commendations and was recommended for some of the military's highest awards for valor and marksmanship excellence. Military historians and ballistics experts studied the shot, using it as a case study in extreme long-range marksmanship and decision-making under pressure. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah's success led to changes in military training and doctrine. Her scientific approach to marksmanship, combining traditional shooting skills with advanced ballistics theory and mathematical analysis, became a model for training future generations of military marksmen. Training programs began to incorporate more emphasis on understanding the physics of long-range shooting and developing the analytical skills needed to solve complex ballistic problems under pressure. Sarah continued to serve with distinction for the remainder of her military career, participating in numerous additional operations and mentoring younger marksmen. But she never forgot the lesson of that night in the Afghan mountains, that with proper preparation, scientific analysis, and unwavering courage, even the impossible could become possible. Years later, after transitioning to civilian life, Sarah would become a prominent advocate for precision in all aspects of life. She established a foundation that provided educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth, emphasizing the same principles that had made her successful as a marksman: careful analysis, methodical preparation, and the courage to attempt difficult challenges. The small-town girl from Texas who had never planned to join the military had become one of the most respected marksmen in American military history. But more than that, she had proven that excellence was not about natural talent alone, but about the willingness to dedicate oneself to continuous improvement and the courage to perform when others depended on your skills. The impossible shot that night in Afghanistan became more than just a demonstration of marksmanship excellence. It became a symbol of what could be achieved when skill, preparation, and courage converged in service of protecting others. Sarah Martinez had calmly adjusted her targets, taken aim with a SEAL's rifle, and achieved what everyone said was impossible. In doing so, she had saved lives, completed a critical mission, and inspired a new generation of warriors to pursue excellence in their own service to their country. The echoes of that single shot continued to resonate through the military community long after the sound had faded from the Afghan mountains, serving as a reminder that in the most critical moments, when lives hang in the balance, exceptional individuals can rise to meet seemingly impossible challenges and prevail through skill, courage, and an unwavering commitment to their mission and their teammates.